Hey, good morning, everyone. It's me, Tiffany. I'm just doing my little walk in the morning, and I wanted to do a check-in. We had talked about different prompts, and I know I had posted something asking like a bad situation that you've been through and how you had made it successful. And I know a few of us had shared stories, and I had shared of an incident that I had experienced in 2017. And I was asked to go ahead and share about that. So I'll go ahead and talk about that. I'll just go ahead and say now, trigger alert, trigger warning. We'll be talking about some abuse that has happened and some difficult subjects. So I'm just offering that warning now to anybody. So in 2017, in May, I had given birth to my daughter. And AJ, my son, is 18 months older than Reagan, so that's how old they were at that time. And during the pregnancy at the end of 2016 and beginning of 2017, before I gave birth, I had stayed here in town at the local domestic violence shelter for families, and I was able to stay in their safe home with AJ and myself after a car accident that the other person had created, and it broke AJ's leg. And I was pregnant, and AJ and we stayed at the domestic violence safe house here in town for about two and a half months during my pregnancy. And that was the total length of time that I could stay there. And after that, they had helped me sign up and put my name on the waiting list for the Rebley family shelter here in town. And there was quite a long waiting list at the time because I guess the shelter had a flood, and a whole wing, 3 levels of a wing, had been flooded, and they had to repair it. So anyways, I had put my name on the waiting list, and at that time you called, I believe, every week or every 2 weeks to check in to make sure you still wanted your name on the waiting list. And I did that. I would call every week, 2 weeks, and I'd check in. I remember speaking to Pamela. She was wonderful. And I was on the waiting list for 6 months. And at the time, we went back to the home, lived in my van, just woke up as early as we could and left most days. But what happened was, in 2017, I had come down from the home we were in, which was in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Bonnie Doon, and I came into Santa Cruz for a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had come up on just a little bit over a year of sobriety at that time, and I was meeting a new sponsor that I had just agreed to work with. And we were meeting at a 6 p.m. meeting. I believe it was a Saturday. And I get into town, and it's about 35-minute drive from the home. When I get into town, I get to the meeting, and this whole time the co-parent, is in charge of the children. And AJ was 2 and Reagan was 6 months old. And I get a text message call, saying that there was an accident and that AJ had fallen and that he was unconscious, and that a helicopter was coming to get him and life flight him to a hospital. They weren't sure at the time if it was going to be Stanford or if it was going to be Valley Med. And I just dropped to my knees. I was amongst my peers at the meeting. I waited for a phone call, additional calls as where to go. And they selected Stanford, Lucille Packard. And when AJ was picked up from the home in Bonnie Doon, he was unconscious still. He was limp, and he was being carried by the co-parent. They had found that he had 2 brain bleeds and bleeding in both eyes. When the ambulance came to pick him up to take him to the field the nearby field so the helicopter could come get him. They had AJ in the back of the ambulance, and I was not there. I was told all of this. But they had AJ in the back of the ambulance. And the ambulance was backing down the driveway, and it didn't know how to drive the roads of the Bonnie Doon, and it fell. It drove back in. It backed in to a ditch, a culvert. And then, so it basically got in an accident. And so then they had to take a pickup truck and put AJ in the back of a pickup truck. Mind you, he's still unconscious. In the back of a pickup truck, and take him to a field. And there in that field, they picked him up and they life flighted him to Stanford. I feel nauseous saying this. My little boy's a miracle. He was life flighted to Stanford, and when I got there, the ex-co-parent was already there because they were in a helicopter. And the neurologists and neurosurgeons came in and told me what they had seen, what they were experiencing on his scans, and he's still unconscious. And it turns out that AJ had climbed the side of a chair, and on the arm of a chair, the left side of an arm of a chair, while unsupervised by anyone. And he fell and hit his head on a glass and a wood end table, and he was knocked unconscious. And the bleeding, the brain bleed, that's what that was from, was the contact on the end table. And what this neurosurgeon had told me, what was concerning to them, was they had seen bleeding in both of his eyes. And that is only conducive to shaken baby syndrome. And, okay, and then at this time, CPS, a representative from CPS, Child Protective Services, came in. He was a man. He was a man, and in front of the ex-co-parent, he looked at me and said, "Tiffany, if you want to keep custody of your children, you need to leave the home tonight, and you will be checking into the Redley Family Shelter." I had been on that list for 6 months. I had been calling it every 2 weeks. And the divine timing of that. I was my most broken. Then AJ came to, I believe, the next day. I had very little time alone. It was imposed on me by the ex-co-parent that they needed support for what had happened, and it was extremely stressful. He was in Stanford. He was inpatient for 4 days. And when they released him, there was direct order of no contact, and that my 2 children and I were directly admitted to the Redley Family Shelter. And we moved in that night. I couldn't go home. I couldn't get anything from the home. I had whatever was in my van, and we didn't have blankets. And AJ still had a severe concussion. He was awake, but he was not coherent. He was not functioning. And every night for 3 weeks, he would wake up, and I had him in a pack and play. Every night for 3 weeks at 2 o'clock in the morning, he would wake up and just start walking circles in his pack and play and puke. And the doctors told me that would happen as a side effect of his injury. But the shelter was a beautiful experience. I moved into one of the wings that was just renovated from the flood, and I ended up moving in with 2 other single mothers and their children. Moved in basically the same day. Very similar to me, different stories, but similar, right? And they had children that were slightly older. Reagan was 6 months old, and during this time, Reagan had plagiocephaly, which was a stiff neck during the pregnancy, which caused her side of her head to be misshapen, and her head similar shape to a football. And so she had a cranial helmet during this time as well. And we were living at the shelter, and Reagan had this pink helmet. And one of the other families that I was with, their daughter had suggested to decorate it. We had a girls' night, and we decorated her helmet with headbands and bows, I got to bond with 2 other families, and in this experience, AJ came to, and he had developed, almost tripled his vocabulary. AJ has severe ADHD and autism. He was 9 weeks premature. So we were anticipating a speech delay, but as soon as he came to from the accident, his vocabulary, he just started compounding 5-word sentences, and his comprehension was elevated. It took a while for him to come to that state, maybe 2 months. While in the shelter, it was a different setup than it is now, and we interacted with so many different types of people and different socioeconomic backgrounds and different educational backgrounds and racial backgrounds. And as my children were learning to communicate, I introduced to them, the salutations of good morning, Mr., and then say their name, or good morning, Miss, and say their name. And so the experience that we had at the shelter was my children, when interacting, because they're bubbly little fun people, love talking. They would greet every single person they saw like that. And I saw the looks on the recipients' faces. They started to glow. These people who were deemed worthless and because of a living situation were seen, even though it was by 2 children and me pushing my double stroller everywhere I went, right? I lived at the shelter for 11 and a half months. I connected with so many people that were placed there for different reasons, and I really believe I was meant to be there. I knew the minute I was placed there, I had conflicting feelings of shame, a lot of shame, and also gratitude, because I was finally free. I finally had physical safety. There were bars and gates and a security guard, and we were safe, even though that meant we were at the shelter and we left a 3-bedroom home. It's not always what it looks like, it's what it feels like and what happens. That experience has given me friendships that have lasted over 5 years. I've met a pastor while there. He helped me so much to understand about myself and also understand the social systems of a shelter. It wasn't anything I knew. Later on, he asked me to help him with his health. And just being able to come full circle in relationships. He helped me in times when I wanted to give up. I would walk around and I wanted to give up. But I knew I was fighting for my children. And I am so glad that I had that experience. AJ knows about that experience. He has memory of him climbing. He has memory of him climbing, and he shared that. So since he shared that, I shared this experience with him. So he knows about this, and he knows that he's a miracle, and he knows he's a survivor. Thank you guys so much for taking your time to watch this. And this is one experience that started out very negatively and ended up being the stability, safety, structure that I needed so I could completely fall apart to find myself. It was the safest place for me to be, completely broken, and learn to set myself free. I am so happy that I had this experience and I can share it with you. I love you.